The woman at the front desk smiled as I slid our reservation across the counter. The kind of resort smile that promises everything will be easy right up until it isn't. She typed my name, Michelle Canning, then paused, eyes flicking from the screen to my face, like she was weighing whether to tell me a small truth or a devastating one. It shows Mr. Canning already checked in with his wife, she said, voice low, as if whispering could soften the blade. My mouth went dry. The room seemed to tilt the air suddenly too cold for a Newport boutique lobby. Somewhere behind me, an elevator chimed, and the hush of conversation turned into a gentle rustle like a theater audience sensing the curtain rise. I didn't turn right away. I stared at the desk at my reflection, faint in the marble at the tiny tremor in my hand. Then I heard the familiar cadence of his laugh, the one he used in real estate showings and backyard barbecues, and the sound threaded straight through my ribs. Before I tell you what happened when I finally turned around, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and if you've ever had a moment when the truth walked into the room before you were ready for it. If this kind of true family story resonates, go ahead and like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. My name is Michelle, and for 14 years I have been the reliable rhythm behind a man who loved a stage. I grew up in a house where you fixed the wobbly chair before company arrived, and you brought extra napkins because someone always forgets. Steadiness was our family language. When my grandmother passed, she left me an inheritance that was meant to be a safety net, something to keep the ground firm under my feet. I did what love often asks of women who believe in forever. I handed that net to the man I married. Robert wore ambition well. He had that easy grin and a suit that made people lean closer, and when he spoke about building something, I heard a future with a front porch and the smell of coffee coming through a screen door. We met in our mid-20s, both hungry in different ways, him for the deal, me for a life I could tend and grow. Newport can be a city of shiny surfaces, and on the surface we fit right in: charity brunches, harbor sunsets, a little girl with wind-tangled hair who could talk you under the table about coral reefs. I pressed pause on my event planning when Sophie was born, telling myself it was just for a season. Seasons stretch. The calendar fills with his closings and client dinners, and you forget that your quiet becomes the scaffolding holding up the picture other people admire. Friends would tell me we were had goals, and I'd smile and nod thinking how goal is just another word for a target if you're not careful. Sabrina came into our circle with the kind of friendliness that feels like relief. She remembered birthdays, she picked up cupcakes when I was running late, she knew the exact shade of blue Sophie loved for her backpack. She worked in marketing, lived 3 blocks over, and had a laugh that made rooms loosen their shoulders. When I worried about Robert's late nights, she told me not to borrow storms from a clear sky. A phrase I liked so much, I wrote it on a sticky note by the fridge. That's how trust slips its hand into yours. It gives you language you want to believe. Our life looked like a postcard even to me when I stood at the edge of it and squinted. The house with the white hydrangeas, the holiday photos on the mantel, the way Robert's arm fit so naturally around my waist in pictures. He thanked me at dinners for keeping us steady and kissed my temple for show, and I told myself that partnership meant giving him space to chase what he was good at. Sometimes I noticed little things that didn't match the faint lipstick smudge he swore was a client hug, the hotel charge on a conference weekend, the scent of a perfume I didn't own. But doubt can be a loyal dog if you feed it reasons. I fed it a lot of reasons. I told myself the story every woman tells when she is too tired to rewrite it. This is just what life looks like when you're busy, when you're building, when you're older, and the heat of new love has settled into a steady flame. The first real tug at the seams didn't come from me. It came from Sophie, who is sharper than either of us gave her credit for. One afternoon, pencil twirling over homework, she said, "Mom, why does Dad call Aunt Sabrina his getaway?" The word dropped between us like a pebble into a well, and I listened for the splash that would prove it wasn't as deep as it sounded. I told her adults sometimes joke about things that don't make sense, and I kissed the top of her head. But later, I locked the bathroom door and stared at the woman in the mirror, who suddenly didn't have a good answer. I thought of Sabrina's easy assurances of Robert's late returns, of my grandmother's money, braided into every polished thing that made our life look so enviable. The story I'd been telling myself felt like a dress one size too small still wearable, but only if I didn't breathe. I turned, and there they were, stepping out of the elevator, as if the world belonged to them. Robert's hand rested on the small of Sabrina's back, with a familiarity I could not mistake, not after 14 years of marriage. She was wrapped in my silk robe, the very one I had folded into my suitcase before we left home, the fabric swaying as she leaned into him with a smirk that tightened my chest. The lobby seemed to freeze around us, conversations dropping into silence, then picking up again in a whispering current that circled through the crowd like wildfire. I felt the heat rise in my face, but my voice came out sharp and steady, the kind of edge that cut through marble and glass. "Robert," I said, "explain yourself." He froze, mouth opening, but no words ready, while Sabrina lifted her chin, her smile cool and practiced. "You weren't supposed to get here yet," she said, as if this were some minor scheduling error. "We thought we'd have the suite first." Gasps rippled through the room, a man muttering something under his breath, and I felt the pulse hammer in my ears. Robert reached toward me with a nervous half-step, his voice breaking into a plea. "Listen, Michelle, this isn't—" But my hand moved before he finished, and the sound of the slap echoed across the lobby. His cheek burned red, his eyes wide, and the gasps around us turned into the quiet rustle of phones being lifted, screens glowing as people captured the scene. "You booked the honeymoon suite with her?" I said, each word rising, refusing to bend under the weight of humiliation. Sabrina's laugh sliced the air, brittle and cruel. "Maybe if you'd taken better care of him, he wouldn't have needed me." I heard the hiss of someone near the concierge. "What a snake!" And the crowd edged closer, hungry for more. My breath came hard, but my words did not falter. "Needed you. You sat at my table, you smiled at my daughter, and then you crept into my husband's bed like a parasite." Sabrina's smirk wavered just a flicker, while Robert tried to shield her with his arm, his voice low and strained. "Stop making a scene," he muttered. But the scene was already made, and he had written it himself. I squared my shoulders and let my voice carry. "You humiliate me in front of strangers. You steal my trust, and you expect silence." I turned toward the lobby, my words rising like a verdict. 12 years of marriage, and this is how he celebrates our anniversary. Phones lifted higher, the red dots of recording lights aimed squarely at Robert's face. He stepped closer, panic creeping in his hand out as if to guide me aside. "Michelle, please let's talk privately." I shoved him back with my bag, steady and deliberate. "Private was what you should have considered before dragging her here." Sabrina crossed her arms, trying to rebuild her poise. "Face it, Michelle. You've been holding him back. He deserves better." My laugh came hollow, stripped of warmth. "Better? He wouldn't have a career or a dime without me. That suite wasn't booked with his success. It was booked with my inheritance." The lobby buzzed louder, the weight of my words striking deeper than my slap. Robert's face flushed crimson, his eyes darting as though searching for an escape, while Sabrina stiffened under the truth. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough so only they could hear. "You think you've won, but this is only the beginning. This is where your humiliation starts." Then I raised my hand, slid the wedding band from my finger, and placed it on the counter. The ring struck the marble with a sharp clang, the kind of sound that punctuates an ending. "You can keep the suite," I said, my eyes fixed on Robert's. "It's the last thing I'll ever give you." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by a tentative clap from somewhere behind me, quickly swallowed by gasps. I picked up my suitcase, turned on my heel, and walked toward the doors, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the hush of the lobby. Behind me, Robert's voice cracked as he called my name, desperation bending his words while Sabrina hissed at him to stop drawing attention. I did not turn back. The glass doors slid open, the ocean air rushing over me, cool and clean, washing away the sting of humiliation. For a moment, I closed my eyes, gripping the handle of my suitcase, and I made a vow to myself. They thought they had broken me. They thought this would be my end. But betrayal is just the spark, and revenge burns longer. That night, as the waves crashed against the shore outside my hotel window, I realized Sophie had already seen the truth before I dared to. She had heard his words, she had named his betrayal, and now it was my turn to live up to the promise I made to her, that she would never see her mother crumble under lies. The robe, the suite, the public shame, it was no longer about a marriage. It was about reclaiming myself and showing my daughter what strength looks like when the mask is ripped away. I stared out at the horizon, the sky bleeding into dark, and felt the fire settle deep into my bones. The life Robert thought he controlled had been built on my sacrifice, and now I would take it back piece by piece. The curtain had risen in that lobby, and the world had seen the mask fall. What came next would not be quiet, and it would not be merciful. Back in Newport, the quiet of our home pressed against me like a weight I couldn't shake. The house looked the same, hydrangeas trimmed along the walk, Sophie's school projects taped proudly on the fridge. But I no longer felt steady inside its walls. I caught myself glancing toward the driveway, bracing for the sound of Robert's tires, even though I'd left him in that lobby with a room key he didn't deserve. When Sophie returned from my sister's house, I forced my voice to sound bright, but the questions in her eyes told me she sensed something had shifted. Children notice more than we want to admit. That evening, she climbed onto the couch beside me, resting her head on my shoulder, with a heaviness that belonged to someone older than 10. "Mom, is Daddy still at work?" she asked, her tone too careful, like she already knew the answer. I swallowed hard, smoothing her hair back, and told her that Daddy had made some mistakes, but we would be okay. She nodded, but the way she clung to me, small fingers knotted into my sweater, showed the depth of her worry. When she finally drifted to sleep, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the glow of the clock, my hands trembling in my lap. The silence in the house no longer comforted me. It felt hollow, like a stage after the lights had gone out. I moved through the days in a daze, trying to keep routines alive. Packing lunches, signing homework, checking emails, every task carried the weight of what I had seen. The betrayal seeped into the smallest corners, the smell of Robert's aftershave lingering on a jacket he'd left behind, the faint scratch of Sabrina's handwriting on a card tucked in Sophie's backpack. I remembered every dinner we shared with her, every holiday where she laughed at my table, and the way she used to take Sophie for ice cream on summer afternoons. It was unbearable to realize I had welcomed her so deeply into my family, only for her to carve me out of my own marriage. At night, when the house grew quiet, I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at the woman in the mirror who looked back like a stranger. My skin was pale, my eyes rimmed red, and I barely recognized the voice whispering, "How could you not have known?" I replayed the moments I'd brushed off, the lipstick, the unexplained trips, the phone calls Sabrina defended on his behalf. Each memory landed like a stone in my chest, building into a weight I could no longer carry silently. I pressed my palms to the counter, forcing myself to breathe, but the ache in my throat told me the tears were coming, whether I allowed them or not. One afternoon, while Sophie was upstairs practicing her debate lines, I sat at the kitchen table with an untouched cup of coffee and opened the bills Robert had left for me to handle. His neat notes in the margins, numbers I once found reassuring, now looked like evidence of control. I had let him take the driver's seat for too long, convincing myself that love meant trust, even when the signs told me otherwise. My grandmother's inheritance was supposed to be my safety net, but in his hands, it became the foundation of his image, the polished life he showed the world. The shame burned hot in my stomach as I realized just how thoroughly I had been erased from the story of our success. Phone calls began trickling in from friends who had caught whispers of what happened at the resort. Some pretended to check on me, voices dripping with sympathy, but I could hear the curiosity beneath it. Newport thrives on gossip, and the story of Robert and Sabrina had already started weaving its way through dinner parties and coffee shops. I wanted to hang up to silence every ring, but I knew avoidance would not protect me. Instead, I kept my responses short, polite, and firm. The less I fed their hunger for details, the less I gave Robert and Sabrina the satisfaction of seeing me flounder in public. Sabrina, however, had no shame. She sent me a message late one evening, the screen lighting up with her name, like a wound reopening. "You're overreacting," it read. "Robert needs someone who believes in him, and I do." My hands shook as I read her words, the audacity of them burning hotter than any insult. She spoke as if I had been the outsider, as if my years of sacrifice meant nothing compared to her sudden claim. I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down on the counter and let the silence speak for me. But the fury inside me grew sharper with every heartbeat. Robert tried too, calling at odd hours, his voice leaving desperate trails across my voicemail. "Michelle, please, let's talk. We can work this out. Don't do anything rash." His pleas might have once tugged at my heart, but now they sounded hollow. Rehearsed the same rhythm he had used to close deals with clients. I listened once, then deleted every message after unwilling to give him the satisfaction of my attention. Each erased call felt like reclaiming a small piece of the power he had stolen from me. The worst moments came when Sophie asked questions I couldn't fully answer. Why did Aunt Sabrina stop coming around? Or why was Daddy yelling on the phone? I chose my words carefully, never lying, but never placing the weight of adult betrayal on her young shoulders. I told her that some people make choices that hurt the people they love, and that Daddy's choices were not her fault. Her solemn nods cut deeper than any argument, a reminder that the betrayal didn't just break me, it bruised her too. As days passed, the quiet inside me changed shape. The trembling eased into stillness, not because the pain lessened, but because clarity began to rise. I saw Robert's arrogance for what it was, and Sabrina's intrusion for the theft it had always been. The tears I shed in the bathroom mirror became fewer, replaced by long hours staring at spreadsheets, bank accounts, and property records. Pain was still present, but alongside it grew something colder, steadier. A plan was beginning to take form, one rooted not in screaming matches or desperate pleas, but in precision. One night, after Sophie was asleep, I stood at the balcony with the ocean breeze brushing my face, the waves rolling steady below. I realized I had a choice: collapse beneath the weight of humiliation, or rise and meet it head on. The image of Robert and Sabrina in that robe in that lobby was no longer just a wound. It was a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. They had chosen their war, and I would choose my response. For the first time since the truth unraveled, my heartbeat slowed not with fear, but with resolve. The morning after I stood on that balcony, something inside me had settled into place. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was steadier than the despair I had been living in. I poured my coffee, opened my laptop, and stared at the numbers that defined our life: joint accounts, credit cards, property taxes. For years, I had told myself these details belonged to Robert, that keeping them straight was part of his world, not mine. But I knew the truth now. Everything in those accounts, every check he wrote with his confident hand, had been seeded with my inheritance. And if he thought he could use what I built to fund a life with Sabrina, he was wrong. At the airport, after the confrontation, I had already moved balances into an account he didn't know existed. Now back at home, I froze the cards one by one, the confirmation screens stacking like stepping stones. My hand shook at first, but by the third card, I was smiling, not with joy, but with something sharper, like the sound of glass breaking clean. I pictured Robert at a restaurant reaching for his wallet, only to have the waiter return with a declined slip. The thought steadied me. Humiliation, the kind I had felt in that lobby, was finally shifting to his side of the ledger. By afternoon, the house felt too full of him, his tailored suits lined up in the closet, his golf clubs leaning against the garage wall. The cologne that lingered on shirts I could no longer stand to touch. I pulled out garbage bags and began filling them not for trash, but for removal. Each item I packed felt like lifting a stone from my chest. By the time the first 3 closets were bare, the phone rang. His name glowed on the screen, then Sabrina's. I let them ring one after another until the sound became nothing more than background noise. Instead, I dialed a number I had saved years ago. A name passed to me quietly by a friend who had survived a nasty divorce. Helena Ortiz. The voice answered. "This is Michelle Canning," I said, my hand trembling, though my voice stayed even. "I need to file for divorce immediately, and I want it to be thorough." There was a pause, then her calm reply. "Come in tomorrow morning. We'll make it happen." That evening, I opened Zillow. Our house wasn't just walls and windows, it was Robert's stage. He had hosted clients at our barbecues, clinked glasses under our roof, and bragged about the view from our deck as if it were proof of his genius. But it wasn't his. It was mine, and I wanted to take it from him in a way that left no doubt. I reached out to Carla Jennings, a realtor I trusted, and asked her to arrange a private meeting. She didn't ask questions. She only said, "I'll be ready when you are." By the time Robert realized what was happening, the listing would already be live. It was just past midnight when the knock came. Robert's voice followed, muffled but urgent. "Michelle, open up. We need to talk." I stood behind the door, wine glass in hand, listening to the agitation in his tone. He tried again, sharper this time. "Don't act like a child. This isn't what you think." My lips curved into a bitter smile. I had heard that line before. I let him pound until the sound grew frantic, then finally answered through the wood. "Go back to your mistress, Robert. Your key doesn't work anymore." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the sound of him retreating down the driveway. I pressed my forehead to the door, feeling my pulse steady for the first time in days. The next morning, I slipped into Helena's office. She was direct, her eyes sharp but kind. We went over documents, accounts, and custody arrangements with a precision that left me both exhausted and relieved. "He won't see this coming," she said as she closed her file. "Good," I replied. "He's been writing the script for too long." From there, I met Carla at a cafe. She leaned across the table, lowering her voice. "You're certain?" I nodded, explaining how Robert had used my inheritance as his foundation. "Then let's list it," she said. Quietly at first. "He doesn't need to know until it's too late." Her calm confidence was a balm I hadn't realized I needed. When I returned home that afternoon, Sophie was waiting with her backpack slung over her shoulder. "Daddy called me," she said quietly. "He said he wants to come home." I crouched to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Daddy made choices that hurt us," I told her gently. "And sometimes, when people make those choices, They don't get to come home right away. She nodded, though her eyes glistened. I hugged her tight, whispering that we would be okay, that she and I were the team that mattered now. Her small arms tightened around me, and I felt the resolve harden again in my chest. That evening, the calls resumed one after another. I didn't answer. Instead, I cooked dinner with Sophie, music playing softly, letting the normalcy of chopping vegetables and setting plates soothe us both. I watched her laugh at something silly on TV, her face untroubled for the first time in days, and I promised myself she would not grow up believing betrayal was something women had to silently endure. That part of the story ended with me. Later, when she was asleep, I returned to my desk. I drafted emails to accountants, pulled records from files I had ignored for years, and began piecing together a map of everything Robert had tried to control. Each line item was a reminder of his arrogance, but also of my own strength resurfacing. By midnight, I closed my laptop, drained but stronger. The woman who had cried into the bathroom mirror was gone. In her place stood someone who had decided not just to survive, but to strike. The morning after I filed with Helena, the silence in the house felt different. It wasn't the hollow ache I had carried before. It was sharper, like the air right before a storm. I poured Sophie's cereal, braided her hair, and walked her to the bus stop, as if nothing had shifted, but inside, I knew the foundation of our lives was about to change forever. Robert was still calling, leaving messages I refused to answer. Every time my phone buzzed, I pictured his face in that lobby when his card failed for the first time. It was a small comfort, but it kept me steady. By mid-morning, the fallout had already started. Carla phoned, her voice hushed but firm. "He's already left 3 messages on my voicemail, Michelle. He sounds frantic, asking why I'm conspiring with you." I thanked her for holding her ground, reassured her that Helena was handling everything, and hung up with the certainty that Robert was losing control. Not just of the money or the house, but of the version of himself he paraded around Newport. Without me as the scaffolding, his carefully constructed image was beginning to crumble. The news traveled fast. My sister called later that afternoon, her tone caught between concern and restrained satisfaction. "I just saw him at Starbucks," she said. Michelle, he was red-faced, screaming into his phone because his card got declined for a $5 coffee. People were recording him. I closed my eyes and almost laughed, the irony too sharp to ignore. The man who had once puffed out his chest at charity luncheons was now unraveling in public over pocket change. Sophie was too young to see it, but the community that had once admired him was watching every misstep. Sabrina was unraveling too, though she tried to keep her mask in place. That evening, a mutual acquaintance forwarded me a screenshot of her social media. The grainy clip from the hotel lobby was circulating my Slap, and her smirk captured in shaky hands but clear enough to tell the story. The comments were merciless. Women called her a thief. Men mocked Robert's arrogance. One caption cut deeper than the rest. "Imagine booking the honeymoon suite with your mistress on your anniversary." I didn't post, didn't add to the storm, but I read every line and let the truth settle like a stone in still water. They weren't just humiliated, they were exposed. The next day, Robert showed up outside Helena's office. I had just finished signing another stack of documents when I saw him across the parking lot. His tie crooked, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes shadowed. He looked smaller, as if the confidence had been drained from his very posture. "Michelle," he called, hurrying toward me. "Please, just give me a chance to explain." I tightened my grip on my briefcase, keeping my distance. "Explain what?" "The suite, the robe, or the fact that Sophie heard you planning it." His mouth opened, then closed again. For once, Robert had no script. He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said firmly. "You lost that right." I walked past him without another word, my heels striking the pavement like punctuation marks. He didn't follow. That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at me with wide eyes. "Is Daddy in trouble?" she asked softly. I brushed her hair back, kissing her forehead. "Daddy made bad choices," I told her gently. "But you and I, we're going to be okay. Better than okay." Her arms circled my neck and she whispered, "I believe you." Those 3 words carried me through the night more powerfully than any glass of wine or signed legal paper. They reminded me who I was fighting for and why surrender was no longer an option. The following week brought the breaking point. I had arranged dinner with my sister and 2 close friends at Selimar, an oceanfront restaurant where half the city came to see and be seen. I wore a navy dress, my hair loose makeup applied with precision. I didn't go to hide. I went to be seen. Halfway through dinner, the air in the room shifted. Conversations quieted, heads turned toward the entrance. Robert had arrived, Sabrina clinging to his arm like a trophy she thought she had won. He looked worn, his eyes hollow, but he held his posture like a man determined to reclaim his stage. He spotted me instantly and made his move, dragging Sabrina toward my table. "Michelle," he said loudly, his voice carrying, "we need to talk." I didn't rise. I met his eyes calmly. "We've already said everything that matters." Sabrina smirked, leaning into him, her voice sweet but mocking. "She's just bitter, Robert. Everyone can see that." My friends stiffened, but I lifted a hand, silencing them. "Bitter? No, Sabrina. I'm free. You, on the other hand, are about to learn what happens when the mask slips." I reached into my purse and tapped my phone screen. My friend across the table, an IT consultant, gave me a subtle nod. Within seconds, Robert's voice filled the restaurant. The recordings I had saved from months earlier, snippets of phone calls he'd made to Sabrina on speaker without realizing I was nearby, poured out over the speakers. "Don't worry, babe. Michelle's clueless. Once I get my hands on the rest of her inheritance, we'll be set for life." Gasps rose around the room, forks clattered onto plates, and Sabrina's face drained of color. Another clip followed. "She gave up her career for me. Some women just want to be useful." "But you're my real partner." The sound of laughter drifted from the back tables. Not the supportive kind, but the mocking kind that cuts. Robert's face flushed crimson. "Turn that off," he barked, reaching for my phone, but I pulled it back steady and calm. "Funny," I said, my voice carrying just enough. "You never minded an audience before." Sabrina tore her arm away from his, her voice shrill. "You told me you loved me. You said she was nothing but a burden." Phones were raised around us, recording every second. Robert sputtered, looking between us, realizing he had been cornered. "Michelle, you don't understand." I rose slowly, my chair sliding back across the floor. "No, Robert, I understand perfectly. I built your career, your home, your image, and you repaid me with lies and betrayal." The room had gone silent, but for the click of cameras and the hiss of whispered judgment. I leaned forward, close enough for only him to hear, then straightened and spoke clearly so every person at Selimar could catch the line. "You booked the honeymoon suite with her, Robert. I booked your one-way ticket out of this town." The restaurant erupted. Gasps, claps, even a whistle from near the bar. Robert's jaw clenched, his face rigid with fury, but no words came. Sabrina shoved him, her voice shaking with rage. "You used me. You said she was finished, that the money was yours." He reached for her, but she stormed off, heels snapping against the tile, leaving him alone under the weight of every camera in the room. He turned back to me, eyes wild. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "People might be on your side now, but they'll tire of your drama." I tilted my head, my voice calm. Look around, Robert. They're already tired of you. Dozens of eyes bore into him, phones still raised flashes capturing every angle of his collapse. He shoved past a table, stumbled on the step, and disappeared into the night, laughter chasing him into the street. I smoothed my napkin over my lap and took a slow sip of wine, my friends silent in awe. My sister leaned in, whispering, "That line is going to be everywhere by tomorrow morning." And she was right. By the next morning, the restaurant confrontation was everywhere. The clip of me standing tall while Robert sputtered was replayed on gossip accounts shared across group chats and dissected in comment sections by strangers who suddenly knew my story. Headlines didn't just mention betrayal, they emphasized the recordings, the inheritance, and the line I had delivered that sealed his humiliation. Newport loved its scandals, but this one burned brighter than any yacht parade or charity feud. Robert had tried to hide behind polish for years, but now his mask was gone, and the whole city saw the truth. He responded the only way he knew how, by trying to control the narrative. A week later, I woke to a buzz on my phone. Friends had sent links to a morning talk show where Robert sat stiffly under studio lights, his smile forced, his eyes shadowed. I didn't need to watch it live to know the tone. He leaned forward, hands folded, claiming he had made mistakes, but painting me as vindictive, unstable, and desperate for attention. He called Sabrina a supportive friend, conveniently ignoring the robe, the suite, and the recordings. He even suggested the audio had been fabricated, his voice trembling with practiced sincerity. For a moment, a handful of his old allies reposted the clip, defending him as if nuance could erase the evidence. But he had underestimated one thing: receipts always tell the truth. That evening, I opened a folder I had been compiling for weeks. Screenshots of emails between Robert and Sabrina, lines bragging about moving money into hidden accounts, mocking my supposed naivete. In one, he wrote, "She's naive enough to think I'm building wealth for us. Truth is, I'm building it for me and you, babe." My finger hovered over the send button for a moment. Then I attached the files to an email with a simple subject line: Robert Canning receipts. I sent it to a local blogger who covered Newport's high society scandals with precision and patience. Within hours, the screenshots were public, spreading faster than his morning show performance ever could. By morning, the hashtag shifted from playful mockery to disgust. Receipts don't lie. People wrote, reposting the proof. Even those who had once admired him were now calling him a con artist. Sabrina tried to shield herself, posting a filtered photo with a caption about love being complicated. The comments shredded her. Women reminded her that betrayal is not complexity, it's cruelty. Men mocked Robert for emptying his wife's inheritance while parading another woman. By the next day, Sabrina's account was gone, her silence louder than any defense she could have offered. Robert, on the other hand, kept spiraling. He released a rambling video filmed from his car, sweat shining on his forehead, as he insisted I was twisting the narrative. Mid-sentence, a text notification lit his screen. "Sabrina, stop dragging me down with you." The internet caught it instantly, replaying, zooming, slowing it down. Within an hour, memes of sinking ships filled timelines, his credibility dissolving in real time. Even Jason, his longtime business partner, could no longer carry him. A press release hit the Newport Gazette 2 days later. The firm distances itself from Mr. Canning's personal and financial misconduct. Contracts collapsed, investors fled, and clients pulled away to protect their names. Helena called me that afternoon, chuckling for the first time since we'd begun. "Michelle, you don't even need to fight this PR war. He's destroying himself with every word." She was right, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. That Saturday, I uploaded a single photo to my social media. It wasn't a rant or a recording, just a picture of Sophie and me on the beach, hand in hand, the ocean stretching behind us. The caption read simply, "We rise by telling the truth." The image spread quietly but powerfully shared, not because it was scandalous, but because it was steady. Messages poured in from women I had never met, some thanking me for my strength, others sharing fragments of their own betrayals. The truth had become bigger than just Robert. It had become a warning. Still, he tried to claw his way back. Reporters stopped calling him. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid him. The cruelest cut came at a charity gala when his father, a man who once boasted about Robert's business genius, stepped up to a microphone and said, "I am ashamed of my son's actions. He does not represent this family's values." I wasn't there, but word traveled fast, and I imagined Robert standing among polished suits and glittering gowns shrinking under the weight of his father's rejection. Even his younger brother, who once idolized him, had begun refusing his calls. Through it all, I remained silent. I didn't reply to his messages, didn't answer Sabrina's taunts, didn't argue with online whispers. My silence became its own kind of weapon, one he couldn't counter with charm or lies. At night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she asked fewer questions. She began to laugh again, her shoulders lighter, her eyes brighter. Watching her return to herself reminded me why I had chosen calculation over collapse. This wasn't only about revenge, it was about teaching her that strength is found in stillness, in not allowing betrayal to dictate the story. One evening, after she fell asleep, I stood at the kitchen window and watched the street lamp flicker against the driveway. Robert had built his life like a house of cards, and I had finally stopped holding up the table. Now each card fell with its own noise: the restaurant, the receipts, the public statements, his family's rejection. I didn't need to push anymore. Gravity was doing the work for me. The morning of our first court hearing, I dressed in silence. A navy blazer pearl earrings hair pulled back in a way that felt calm, but unyielding. Across town, Robert arrived in a crumpled suit with his lawyer at his side, dark circles carved into his face. For years, he had walked into rooms with an easy smirk. But in that courtroom, he looked smaller, stripped of the polish he once wore like armor. I sat with Helena at my side, steady as a stone as the judge called our names. Helena wasted no time. She filed motion after motion with clean precision, requesting full financial disclosure. What followed was the unspooling of everything Robert had hidden: shell accounts, dinner charges, business trips that doubled as affairs. The paper trail was undeniable. The judge's tone sharpened with each revelation. "Mr. Canning, your financial behavior borders on fraud. Be grateful this is a divorce proceeding and not an indictment." Robert's jaw locked, his eyes darting toward me as if he could will me back into silence. But I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Helena's voice carried the truth with every page she turned. Piece by piece, the life he thought he owned was dismantled. The house mine. The deed traced back to my inheritance money I had invested when we were just starting out. The cars sold at auction, proceeds placed in a trust for Sophie. Custody full to me, with only supervised visits granted to Robert after the court reviewed his erratic messages and late-night videos. His lawyer tried to spin the story, suggesting I was vengeful, but the judge shook her head. "Mr. Canning, your public conduct has done more damage to your credibility than any words your wife could have spoken." When the gavel fell, it was final. I had kept the home, my daughter, and control of the finances. Robert was left with nothing but his wrinkled suit and the debt he could no longer outrun. Word spread quickly through Newport. At a family gathering I didn't attend, his father reportedly stood and announced that Robert was no longer welcome under his roof. "He has disgraced the Canning name and will receive no financial support," he said, his voice echoing through a room filled with cousins and colleagues. Robert's younger brother, who had once followed him like a shadow, pulled his arm away when Robert tried to corner him afterward. "You're toxic," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You nearly ruined this family's reputation." Don't call me again. Robert had become radioactive. Even blood turned away. Sabrina fared no better. Her engagement ended months earlier, and with Robert broke and spiraling, she tried to slip back into her old circles. Newport, however, has a long memory. Former friends avoided her at coffee shops, whispers following her through grocery aisles. She posted a tearful video about love being misunderstood, but the comments cut her apart. By morning, the video was gone, and so was her account. The woman who once lounged in my silk robe like she had won a prize was left with no audience and no stage. Robert's descent accelerated. Jason dissolved their business partnership, formally citing irreparable differences. Lawsuits began to pile in from clients accusing him of negligence and mismanagement. His number leaked prank calls filling his voicemail until he changed phones more than once. Even his landlord lost patience when rent checks bounced, serving notice on the downtown condo he had clung to as his last symbol of status. I watched from a distance, not with pity, but with clarity. This was a man who had mocked me behind my back, siphoned my inheritance, and humiliated me in public. Now he was a pariah stripped of everything he once wielded. The final blow came quietly in an envelope delivered to my mailbox. The court had approved wage garnishment, ensuring that every dollar Robert earned above basic living expenses would funnel directly into Sophie's trust. I poured myself a glass of wine and read the notice twice, letting the truth sink in. Robert wasn't just broke, he was working for me now, every paycheck chained to the daughter he had betrayed. That night, as I tucked Sophie in, she asked, "Is Daddy going to be okay?" I smoothed her blanket and told her softly, "Daddy's choices have consequences. But you and we're more than okay." She nodded, her eyes clear, and drifted into sleep. A few days later, I drove past the places he once strutted through. The country club had revoked his membership. His favorite bar had banned him after an outburst when his card declined. Outside a dingy extended-stay motel, I saw him once, shoulders hunched, phone pressed to his ear, like he still had someone left to call. He didn't. Newport, which had once embraced his smile, now looked at him like a cautionary tale. The man who once booked a honeymoon suite for his mistress on our anniversary now lived in a room that smelled of mildew. I never confronted him again. I didn't need to. His punishment wasn't in the words I might have spoken, but in the silence I gave him, in the life that moved forward without him. He had built his empire on my trust, and when I withdrew it, the walls collapsed. By then, he was nothing more than background noise fading into the distance. Robert showed up one last time on a Saturday afternoon. Through the glass, I saw a man I hardly recognized. Hair unkempt, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow from weeks of unraveling. He asked for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes to explain himself. I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me so Sophie wouldn't hear. His words tumbled out broken and uneven about mistakes, about how he thought I'd always be there to catch him. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. He begged, saying he had no one left. He admitted he'd lost his business, his family, even Sabrina. He said he didn't want to die alone. I looked at him and saw the truth. He hadn't just lost me, he had lost himself long before. My voice was steady when I told him, "You shouldn't have lived like a man who deserved it." His face crumpled, but I didn't waver. I closed the door behind me, leaving him on the porch with the fading light. That was the last time I ever saw him. 2 years passed, and the distance brought healing. Sophie grew taller, her confidence blooming in ways I had once only dreamed for her. She stood at a school debate podium with fire in her eyes, speaking of fairness and justice, and I felt a swell of pride so strong it nearly broke me. My event planning business, once set aside for Robert's ambition, now thrived in my own hands. Clients waited months for a meeting drawn not by scandal, but by the steadiness they saw in me. Our home felt lighter, painted with new colors and filled with laughter that no longer carried the weight of secrets. Every so often, I'd hear whispers of Robert. Newport is small, and his name still drifted through conversations like a ghost. Couch surfing odd jobs, motels that smelled of mildew. He was no longer a man who mattered in my story. Sabrina disappeared too, marrying someone far away. Her name mentioned only with a shake of the head. I never sought them out. Their absence was enough. Silence was the answer they both earned. One evening, Sophie asked me quietly, "Do you ever think about what happened?" I paused before answering, because I wanted her to hear the truth, not the pain. "I think about how strong it made us," I said. "How it showed us we don't need anyone who betrays us. Freedom is better than any fairy tale we thought we had." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her homework. Children don't need long explanations, just truth steady and simple. Now when I stand on the balcony at night and feel the ocean breeze, I think back to the woman who walked out of that hotel lobby with her pride bleeding and her heart shattered. She didn't know then that humiliation was only the spark. She didn't know it would be the doorway to a stronger life. But I do now. Robert thought betrayal would break me. Instead, it rebuilt me. And as the waves crash below, I know this story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming dignity, teaching my daughter resilience, and choosing a life where betrayal no longer writes the script. Justice was served not in anger, but in clarity. I didn't just survive him. I rose. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke most to you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you've ever faced betrayal, may you find the same freedom and strength waiting on the other side.